Good morning. Right, my internets are off at the moment, so I don't know when I'll be able to get this video up, but it doesn't really matter because it's a very long-term sort of looking video. I'll say 5 years. What I'm saying is over the next 5 years, we've had 5 years of this crisis now, 5 years. The next 5 years will come and go as quickly as the last 5 years came and went. And things will happen. And the main thing that I think will happen in shorthand would be that the central banks will move from being pure protectors of the banks to being at least in league with, maybe even tools of their own governments. Right. So just as an aid memoir, I've put this CNN Money headline up. Half of mortgage borrowers under 40 are underwater. Now, when I read this, I thought that's a good way of looking at it. Good thinking by CNN Money to think of it that way. It is the younger people that have come later into the market are more likely to be underwater. And if for nothing else, that's just an interesting heading. And it's fine for central bankers and government to think, well, as long as eventually we can create growth, they'll dig their way out of this underwaterness. But it's not really good enough. And it's all part of what I think is going to happen. Basically, the Fed is going to move towards a position where it will break up the too big to fail banks in the next 5 years. It's going to break up the too big to fail banks. The Fed and the US government, Treasury, all of them are going to break up the too big to fail banks. Derivatives are going to be a heck of a problem for them because, say, for JP Morgan, who have lots of them, what on earth do you do with those derivatives? But I think besides that, everything else is in place to carve them up. Because basically, the banks over the last 5 years have been a total and utter pain in everyone's arse. And they can do what they like to them and there won't be too much pushback. The only pushback would be from money coming into Washington. But to think that the money coming into Washington will stop because there are proposals to break up the too big to fail banks is obviously wrong. More money will flood in to try and stop them. The money will always flood in from to Washington, basically, is what I'm saying. And I would say, is another thing that might sound a bit radical, this would be even more likely to happen if Romney and Ryan get in. Okay, moving on. United Kingdom, this is from The Guardian. I'll read this. This month, to much fanfare, the Bank of England and Treasury launched the 80 billion Funding for Lending scheme to incentivise banks and building societies to boost their lending to UK households and non-financial companies. The sceptics wondered if it would be better than the earlier Project Merlin, seen as having failed to channel cash to businesses and households. They've already had Project Merlin to do exactly this, and there's good signs already that this latest one that's only just started is going to fail as well. They were right to be sceptical. Funding for lending lets the banks borrow billions at just 0.25% interest to prod them to loosen the purse strings, especially for first-time buyers who face huge hurdles when finding loans. Yet the reverse seems to be happening. Santander has stunned the mortgage industry by raising its standard variable rate from 4.24 to 4.74%. It won't say how many customers are affected, although it's understood to be up to 300,000. Someone with a £150,000 mortgage will pay an extra £44 a month. The British banking system. Santander has come in this century into the British banking system. Last century, the 20th century, no incomers came in at all to the British banking sector, retail sector. None. Not one. It in fact slimmed down with a couple of mergers. Why was this? It was because it was protected by the Bank of England and the government to basically say to the banks, you stay being good boys and we'll protect you. We'll give you an effective monopoly. But the banks have now gone wrong on their side of the unwritten bargain. Santander have come in, but Santander are being naughty now as well, as seen through the eyes of the government. So I've got the end of this article. Mortgage brokers call Santander's move a straightforward profiteering, with the bank safe in the knowledge that many, if not most, of its SVR customers, standard variable rate customers, will have nowhere else to go, and they're probably right. The government is pinning its hopes for economic recovery partly on a revival of Britain's house building sector. But how, with interest rates rising rather than falling, are potential buyers going to finance these new homes? What I'm thinking is that the governments are doing these things across the world, Western world, that are saying is going to make the economy better. We think we all know that the economy isn't going to get better anyway for many other various reasons. It's just not. Governments are going to look very stupid. They're already in a double dip, and it's going to get worse across the world, and the double dip's going to get worse. They are going to have to blame someone. They cannot possibly blame themselves. Me thinking they will be blaming the banks, and to blame the banks they are also going to have to get hold of the central bank by the scruff of the neck, kicking and screaming, and drag it into their bosom. And it will become a double whammy for the banks, where the central bank, if it knows what's good for it, is going to do what the government tells it to do. And so it's going to be central bank and government against the banks. Third and last aid memoir to kick me off to say things is from the Financial Times about the elections in Holland, the Netherlands. A win by the SP and its leader Emile Roemer on September 12 could mean a reversal for a country that has been one of the strongest advocates of austerity policies throughout the Eurozone crisis. If the party takes the Netherlands out of the German-led camp of countries pressing for stricter EU budgetary supervision in exchange for Eurozone rescue measures, it could shift the balance of power in Europe as a whole. I don't think that is going to happen. They're socialists that are probably going to win in Holland, if the polls are correct, but I don't think that makes much difference directly to the not signing up for austerity. I think everyone will sign up to the Germans' austerity ideas, knowing that the quid pro quo is that the ECB opens up the checkbook and starts writing checks. In other words, we will stop spending money as long as we're given more money. Now we will have, say, a huge crescent going round the core, which is just going to be Germany and Austria, Holland, socialist, François Hollande running France, and then all the Mediterranean countries and up through Eastern Europe who are struggling, who will all want much more money from the ECB. Now this is even before this whole crescent of periphery, let's call them periphery, don't overwhelm even the austerity plans of the Germans. I'm sure they'll all sign up for the austerity plans of the Germans to get the ECB started, the European Central Bank started, of giving money out. It might be buying bonds, it might be all sorts of things, probably capping bonds capped at certain rates. When that is established and a happening thing, then they will democratically get hold of the institution that Germany and Austria are working through that says how much austerity is being done. And then democratically take over that institution and make the things that have to be done austerity-wise to keep the ECB paying out, just water that down until all you have to say is hail Jacques Delors twice, spit on the floor and turn around, and then the ECB still keeps pumping the money out. What that is the European countries getting hold of the central bank and doing, as I said, will probably happen in the UK and the US as well. The governments get hold of the central bank and manipulate the central bank for what they want. And if it involves strangling banks, then banks will be strangled. Shrunk down, got back under control. There's been a power struggle that the banks have won. It will swing over that the natural power will go back to governments, with the central banks working as their henchmen to get the power back to the governments. I don't think it'll make things much better, but it will be an interesting swing of power. Maybe.